We had already closed. The signs swung in the wind as Emily spotted them. 12 truck drivers, stranded in the snow with nowhere left to go. The little diner she and her husband had built was barely hanging on. All that remained were a few cans of soup, some stale bread, and a pot of cold coffee. But that night, Emily opened the door without a second thought. She served them everything she had left. No hesitation, no regrets. 2 days later, the ground truly shook, and something extraordinary rolled into town. Welcome to Life Unsifted. If you love stories like this, hit subscribe and let us keep bringing powerful moments to your screen. The storm had swallowed the highway. From inside the diner, Emily could barely see the world beyond the glass. Snow whipped in furious sheets, blurring the neon glow of the old Jack and Emily's truck stop sign until it flickered like a ghost in the dark. She tightened her cardigan around her shoulders and wiped the counter one more time, out of habit more than need. Business had been dead all day. It wasn't just the storm. It was everything. The new highway 6 miles west, the dwindling traffic, the bills piling up faster than the snow outside. The clock behind the register ticked past 7. Time to close. Emily reached for the door, ready to flip the open sign to closed, when the sharp jingle of the bell stopped her hand midair. A man stumbled in, heavy coat dusted with snow, boots leaving wet prints on the worn floorboards. He pulled his hood back, revealing a weathered face lined by the road in the cold. "Evening," he said, his voice rough from the wind. "Any chance you're still serving? The interstates is shut down about 15 miles back. Ain't no place open." Emily hesitated, glancing at the empty shelves behind her, the last pot of coffee sputtering low on the burner. Then she nodded. "Come on in, warm yourself up." He slid onto a stool at the counter, stamping his feet to shake off the cold. His name was Mike. Within minutes, the door jingled again and again. One after another, more truckers staggered in, tired, frozen, stranded. Emily's heart twisted. They had barely enough food left for tomorrow, much less a room full of hungry drivers. She looked toward the kitchen, where young Ethan wiped down the grill with the resignation of someone used to quiet nights. Jack watched from the corner, his wheelchair tucked into the shadows, the old denim jacket he always wore draped loosely over his thin frame. His gaze drifted to the door, then to the gathering crowd. And for a moment, just a moment, there was a flicker of something familiar in his eyes, something alive. Emily made a decision without speaking it out loud. She motioned Ethan toward the kitchen. "Use what we've got," she said simply. "No one sleeps cold tonight." And so the diner stayed open. Plates clattered, coffee brewed, the little space filled with the sounds of boots stomping warmth back into toes, of rough laughter cutting through the howling wind, of old stories swapping hands like worn dollar bills. Jack rolled forward from the shadows, drawn into easy conversation, names and road tales flowing like they once did, as if the years hadn't folded in on themselves. For a few hours, it didn't matter that the diner was bleeding money. It didn't matter that the future outside those walls was cold and uncertain. Inside, for tonight, they were alive again. Emily leaned against the counter, wiping her hands on her apron, watching the snow pile higher against the windows. Somewhere deep in her chest, questions stirred, unspoken, unanswered. She turned toward the storm, her fingers resting lightly on the worn wood of the doorframe. And she wondered, could anything good survive a winter like this? She didn't know yet. But 2 days from now, the ground itself would tremble with the answer. Before all the dust and broken dreams, Jack Thompson was a name whispered over radios across half the country. He wasn't the fastest, he wasn't the loudest. But when storms swallowed highways and loneliness crept into the cab, it was Jack's steady voice crackling over the CB that pulled people through. "Hang tight, mile marker 142. I'm coming for you." That was Jack. The road was his religion, the rig his altar, and the endless miles stitched the years together in a rhythm he knew better than the beat of his own heart. Emily loved him for that wildness, that unwavering tether to something bigger than himself. She loved the way his eyes lit up, talking about sunsets over the desert, long-haul friends he only knew by call signs, the hush that came with a foggy morning run. They built a life between stoplights and mile markers, a home stitched from soft returns and harder goodbyes. Then one day the wheels stopped turning. Jack never talked about what happened. Brakes failed, road curves sharper than expected. The world, the only one he knew, folded in on itself. When he woke in the hospital, part of him was gone, not just the leg, the man who sang to the highway, who saw every horizon as an invitation. He was gone too. Jack came home different, quieter. He sat by the window for hours, watching traffic roll past on distant roads, his hands curled tight around the arms of his wheelchair, as if bracing against a crash that had already come and gone. And Emily stayed. She cooked, she cleaned, she smiled through the kind of heartbreak that didn't scream. It whispered every single day until even silence hurt. Until one morning, Emily poured 2 cups of coffee, set them down on the battered kitchen table and said, "If the road won't carry you anymore, maybe we can build something that will." That afternoon, they signed the lease for a crumbling old diner just off Route 66. It smelled like dust and old dreams, but to Emily, it smelled like hope. Jack and Emily's truck stop opened with little fanfare and even less money. But soon word spread. Truckers started coming. Coffee steamed behind the counter. Stories swapped hands like currency. Photos filled the walls. Drivers in ball caps, arms slung around each other. Sharpie signatures bleeding into the wood. Jack found a new rhythm, slower but no less real. He leaned into conversations at the counter, fixed radios and taillights, became, in his own way, a lighthouse keeper for lost ships on the asphalt sea. It wasn't the life he had before, but it was a life, and it was enough, until the road moved. 6 miles west, a gleaming new stretch of highway pulled the flow of trucks away like a riptide. The diner's parking lot, once packed and loud, fell quiet. Booths emptied. The coffee stayed full, growing cold in the pot. Jack returned to the window seat, staring, waiting for trucks that no longer came. Emily fought harder, smiling wider, hiding foreclosure notices behind old menus no one read anymore. But some battles don't make noise when they're lost. Some dreams just fade quietly, like smoke slipping out a cracked window. Now tonight, the storm outside clawed at the diner windows. Inside, Jack sat silent, his fingers idly tracing the grain of the table. Emily wiped down the counter for the 10th time, her hands moving without thought, her heart heavier than any blizzard could explain. Young Ethan hunched by the kitchen door, trying to stay busy, trying not to see the cracks forming around him. Hope hung in the air, or not a fire anymore, not even a flame. Just a stubborn ember, glowing faintly against all the cold. And still, Emily would not let it die. By 8 o'clock, the diner was full. The tables, once yawning with emptiness, now overflowed with thick jackets, heavy boots, and the low hum of tired men trying to thaw the storm out of their bones. The heaters fought valiantly against the cold, rattling in the corners, but the windows still fogged up with each breath. Emily moved between the tables with Ethan trailing behind, balancing plates piled with whatever food they could find. Scrambled eggs, grilled sandwiches, soup scraped from the bottom of the last pot. The shelves in the pantry emptied faster than the snow piled up outside. They didn't care, they served what they had, smiling, laughing even when the bread ran out, and they started slicing up old hamburger buns to dip into soup. Mike sat at the counter, warming his hands around a chip mug, telling stories that made the men around him chuckle low and tired. Jack watched from his usual corner, at first silent, but as the hours stretched long, as plates clattered and boots stomped and the coffee flowed like lifeblood, something shifted. One of the drivers, a man with a beard frosted white with snow, squinted across the diner. "You," he said, pointing a thick finger at Jack. "Ain't you CB King?" The room quieted, heads turned. Jack froze, startled. Emily turned, the rag in her hand going limp. The bearded man laughed, a deep rumble that shook the icicles off the moment. "Yeah, you are, Jack Thompson, right? You got me through Raton Pass in that storm of '98. Thought I was a goner till you talked me through." Murmurs rippled through the room. Another voice. "You helped me once. Kansas, black ice, remember? CB King, that's what we called you." Jack, who hadn't said more than 2 words to a stranger in months, smiled. A real smile, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes, the kind Emily hadn't seen in what felt like a lifetime. "You boys sure have better memories than I do," Jack said, voice rough but warm. Laughter rose like smoke from the tables. Stories spilled out, tales of breakdowns, blizzards, lonely midnight miles where Jack's calm voice had been the difference between getting home and getting lost. Emily stood behind the counter, hand on the coffee pot, watching Jack come back to life in front of her eyes. She didn't say anything, didn't trust herself to. Instead, she poured another cup, wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater, and let the moment fill the room like a second sunrise. But the night wasn't done testing them yet. A sudden shudder rattled the diner. The heaters groaned once, then fell silent. The cold rushed in like a living thing. Mike was already moving, his boots squeaking on the wet floor as he knelt by the old furnace. "Give me a minute," he muttered, disappearing behind the kitchen door. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, teeth chattering not just from the cold. The food was almost gone. The supplies in the kitchen would barely last another hour. She caught Ethan's worried glance from across the room and nodded once. Steady, sure, though inside she felt herself unraveling thread by thread. 10 minutes later, Mike re-emerged, smudged with grease and snowmelt, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Patched it up best I could," he said, flashing a tired grin. "She'll hold, for now." Relief loosened something in Emily's chest. Not a victory, but a reprieve. Still, there was the food. When the last of the eggs were scraped out of the pan, when the last bowl of soup was ladled out, Emily disappeared into the tiny house behind the diner. She dug through the pantry with cold fingers, grabbing cans of baked beans, a sack of old potatoes, 2 frozen meatloaves meant for their own meals later in the week. She carried it all back into the diner without a word, just set it down by the stove and got to work. The truckers noticed. None of them said anything, but their faces softened. Their voices grew quieter, more reverent. Some things you don't repay with money, you repay with respect. That night, nobody left. They pulled together tables, pushed benches against walls, spread out jackets and blankets like makeshift beds. Emily found a few extra quilts stashed in the supply closet and handed them out. Laughter and low conversation filled the air, mixing with the smell of strong coffee and old leather. Mike tuned the old radio by the counter, found a scratchy station playing country songs from another lifetime. Jack rolled into the middle of it all, swapping stories, passing out advice, smiling in a way that made the years fall away from him. At one point, a young driver, no older than Ethan, sat cross-legged on the floor, listening wide-eyed as Jack told the story of a mountain pass, a blizzard, and a truck held together by sheer stubbornness and duct tape. And for a few precious hours, the storm outside might as well not have existed. The diner, worn and weary as it was, had become a lighthouse again, a place where lost ships could find each other and ride out the night together. Because on the road, too, and in life, there are no strangers, only fellow travelers. And that night, the storm could howl all it wanted. Inside Jack and Emily's, the fire kept burning. 2 days after the storm, the diner sat in silence again. The snow outside had settled into thick frozen drifts. The roads were mostly clear now, trucks rolling down the new highway far to the west, a steady hum that never touched their little corner anymore. Inside, Jack wiped down the counter in slow, thoughtful circles, a damp cloth dragging across the worn wood. Emily swept near the front door, the broom scratching softly against the tiles, her mind elsewhere. On the bills she still couldn't pay, on the for sale sign leaning awkwardly against the fence out back. The night of the blizzard felt like a dream now, something too warm, too bright to have survived the cold light of morning. The coffee pot sputtered half-heartedly. The clock ticked. The world moved on. And then, a sound. Low at first, a rumble like distant thunder on dry land. Emily paused, broom still in her hand. Jack looked up sharply from the counter. The rumble grew louder, closer, until it became a series of heavy, unmistakable sighs. The sound of air brakes hissing, of diesel engines downshifting, of wheels crunching over packed snow. Emily dropped the broom. Outside the frosted windows, one truck appeared, then another, and another. Within minutes, the parking lot was full, a sea of shining rigs stretching down the side road, glinting under the pale winter sun like a caravan come home. The front door swung open, and there stood Mike, still bundled against the cold, a crooked grin on his face. "Hope you got more coffee ready," he said, voice carrying across the silent diner. Behind him, drivers piled out of their trucks, Men and women Emily had never met, some she recognized from years past, other strangers drawn by a voice passed hand to hand across the CB waves. The diner filled with boots and laughter, and the sweet, overwhelming noise of life. Mike pulled a folded envelope from inside his jacket and handed it to Emily. "We passed the hat around," he said. "Truckers, dispatchers, companies, even a few folks from the old radio days chipped in." Emily stared at the envelope, thick and heavy with hope she hadn't dared to ask for. "It's enough," Mike added, his voice softer now. "Enough to clear the bank. Keep the lights on. Start over if you want to." Her hands trembled as she took it. Before she could find her voice, another driver stepped forward, an older man with a gray beard and a CB radio mic dangling from his hand. "I think this belongs to you," he said. He set the microphone gently on the counter. A battered old relic, scuffed and scratched, but still alive with memory. Jack reached out, fingers brushing the mic like it might disappear if he touched it too hard. "Had this since '92, the old man said. "You gave it to me when mine fried out in the middle of a storm. Figured it's time it came home." Jack's throat worked silently, emotion catching deep in his chest. He nodded once, a small, fierce movement. Emily, watching him, felt something crack and heal at the same time. Mike slapped the counter with a laugh. "Word's out," he said. "Every driver from here to the Rockies knows about Jack and Emily's now. You're not getting rid of us that easy." Laughter broke out across the diner, warm and wild. Ethan ducked out from the kitchen, his mouth hanging open at the sight of the packed room. The for sale sign leaned forgotten against the fence outside, snow drifting up around its edges. Inside, Jack turned the old CB microphone over in his hands. Emily watched the light return to his face, not all at once, but steady, like sunrise warming a frozen earth. Hope wasn't a firestorm, it wasn't a miracle. It was this, battered voices finding their way back. Open doors in a world of closed ones. The stubborn belief that kindness still mattered. In Jack's eyes, Emily saw it, the thing she had almost forgotten how to hope for. Not just survival, life. Real, messy, glorious life. And this time, they wouldn't be fighting alone. 1 year later, Jack and Emily's truck stop was alive again. The parking lot overflowed with rigs from all corners of the country, their chrome flashing under the high Oklahoma sun. Inside, the diner buzzed, boots stomping, coffee pouring, laughter bouncing off the old wood beams like it had never left. On the far wall, a framed photograph hung proudly. "Heard this place is kinda legendary." Emily chuckled softly. "First coffee's on the house," she said. "And so's a story if you're staying long enough to hear one." Outside, trucks came and went. Inside, stories began again, stitched together by shared roads, lost nights, and second chances. Emily wiped her hands on her apron and leaned against the counter for a moment, letting the sound of life wash over her. And in the golden hum of it all, she could almost feel Jack beside her. Not as a memory, not as a shadow, but as part of the air itself, still watching the door, still welcoming the road home, still here, always here.